Hello, my name is Dallin Rowley, and I will be presenting on the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So first off, the five W's as to anything, right? Who was involved, when, what, where, why, and also how, the H. But today we're going to talk about the five W's. Who was involved? When was it? What even happened? What was it? Where did it happen, and why? Who was involved? The Mormons. The wagon train from Arkansas. When? It was on September 11th, 1857, but there are other dates, as we will discuss. What was it that happened? 120 men, women, and children were brutally murdered. Where did it happen? It was in Meadow, Utah, just north of Parowan, and Cedar City. And why? Ooh, let's get into this, because everyone has their own opinion, but let's decide with the facts. So who was involved? The settlers of southern Utah, led by John D. Lee, John Higbee, Isaac C. Haight. Brigham Young is a prophet of the Mormon Church at this time, so he was involved as well. There's speculation, and we'll talk about how involved he was. The Baker Fancher Party, they were the wagon train from Arkansas area that was going to California to try and strike it rich, looking for gold. And the Paiute Indians were involved as well. When did this happen? So a couple key dates to understanding a little bit why this happened. So on June 27th, 1844, Joseph Smith was murdered in a prison with his brother. Now this happened nowhere near Utah, but it's important to know because the timeline here kind of adds up. So in 1844, Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Mormon Church at this time, was murdered, shot, as he was in jail by a group of people who didn't think that he deserved to live, apparently. And this was really the first killing, one of the first killings. There was some before this, but the first killing that really had like major implications for the LDS Church. May 13th, 1857, Parley P. Pratt. This was one of the apostles from the Mormon Church. He was in Arkansas, actually, at the time. He was on a mission serving, trying to find and bring souls to Christ. And he met this woman. And of course, Mormons were practicing polygamy during these days. So he met this woman and they fell in love and she left her husband. Well, his body was found by a river and he had been murdered by this lady's husband. Well, ex-husband, husband. No one really got divorced back then. She just left him. Anyway, he was murdered. This was May 13th of the same year that this happened. And then in 1857, the U.S. government was sending an army to Utah because there were discussions of secession and, there were polygamy and different things, and Mormons were the enemies of the state, and on and on and on the reasons why he was sending this military troop here. But overall, there was a history of oppression and things that happened to the Mormons as they did this. So their prophet gets murdered 13 years before this. They're all moving to Utah. Parley P. Pratt, one of their beloved apostles, was murdered just a couple months before this. They hear about it. They hear rumors. It gets blown up. People from Arkansas, people from Missouri, people from that area have murdered us. And the U.S. government sending an army. Oh no, what else is going to happen? And then this group, Baker Fancher Party, is from Arkansas and Missouri and surrounding areas. Are they here to kill us too? So that was with the dates of when. And I got these all from the book that was provided to read. Okay, what was it that happened? The Baker Fancher Party members were brutally murdered. Native Americans were involved in this, and they were meant to be the patsy by the Mormon Church. They were setting up the Native Americans to be the patsy and kind of take all the blame. Something interesting here is that no kids younger than 8 were killed. In the reading it says because they wouldn't remember it. Under 8, your memory gets a little cloudy. They don't think that anyone under 8 could have possibly remembered the events, and so they were safe to leave the 7-year-old and younger kids alive. Where did this happen? It happened in Meadow, Utah. It's just north of Parowan, which is north of Cedar City, a major city there in central or southern Utah. And this is where it all happened. It happened next to kind of a ranch, but it was Jacob Hamblin's house. It was about a quarter mile away from his house in Meadow, Utah. So why? Why did this happen? Now, as I kind of alluded to earlier, Mormons had had a history of oppression and violence against them and being treated like the scum of the earth. Many of these people that had settled in Utah had left from Europe in different places, some from Africa, but mainly from Europe, and had come to Nauvoo and then were turned. Then they had to leave for Missouri, and then they had made the trek across the plains to Utah where they were told they'd be safe. And then they've even moved further than Salt Lake. They'd left their band of Zion people, and they had moved further south to southern Utah in Cedar City, St. George area. And so they had traveled a long time, and this entire time they'd been abused. They'd been treated like the scum of the earth. They'd been molested. They'd been, all these things. Rumors of the army sent to that were coming had kind of triggered people as well. They thought that this Baker Fancher party could have been spies or an early militia group sent to try and weaken them or get the numbers of men. Anyway, that's things that had been going on in people's head. Now, just like Parley P. Pratt had been murdered, Joseph Smith had been murdered years before. So it wasn't like a new thing. They see the pattern, right? They're like, oh, well, you killed this person, then we had to leave. You killed this person, are we going to have to leave now? Or, we're done running. We're going to stand and fight. Another thing that's important to know during this time period was that Brigham Young had been talking about seceding from the United States, and he had banned all trade with outsiders that were not LDS. So if you weren't Mormon, you weren't being traded with. So the Baker Fancher party had a hard time upon arriving in Salt Lake getting supplies because of this dictated decision from Brigham Young to not trade with outsiders. So Baker Fancher party stopped in Salt Lake, which had become a major place to stop because it was really the last city before you hit California, San Francisco, or if you're going north, going to Oregon. It was your really last place to stop, trade for goods, get supplies for the last little leg of your journey, and make it safely. So this was a big deal, not trading with them. And so you hear that from your leader, and immediately there has to be a reason. So you get a little bit defensive, you get a little bit aggressive. That's just natural reactions. So all of this was going on. So let's talk about the planning side and the events of the massacre. So those three men mentioned earlier, Isaac Haight, John D. Lee, John Higbee, those three right there. Prior to all of this happening, Cedar City had a major group meeting with all the priesthood leaders in the area to decide what they should do, whether it should hurt them, trade with them, help them, etc., etc. And in this meeting with all the leaders, they decided not to do anything. However, with these three men decided to meet behind everyone's back and decided that they were going to kill this group of people. During the previous meeting, they had decided to send a letter to Brigham Young asking him for instructions. And so they were still doing that, but they decided behind everyone's back they were going to kill him. So this was their plan. They were going to have the Indians attack, and then hopefully, this would give the Baker Fancher people a little surprise. They would surrender. Mormons would become heroes, come try to save the day, and then they'd kill them. So this is what happened. The Indians started attacking, but it wasn't just Indians, okay? It wasn't just the Paiutes. It was men, white men and women with black paint, or not men and women. It was white men, sorry, with black paint on their head, dressed up like an Indian, attacking this group of people. So the Baker Fancher circle the wagons up, right? It's hard to kill you if you're protected. So they're doing this and they're having a little siege. Then the Mormons come in and they're gonna work it out on behalf of the Indians and the Baker Fancher party. So they come and they're going to escort them to safety. So This is like the first part, and everything's going according to plan so far, and everything's working. So they come in and they make a deal, right? They say, all right, Indians, stop firing. We're your friends. We trade with you. We know you. These guys have not done anything wrong. They're just trying to trade. They're just trying to come through. We will walk with you, Baker Fancher Party, and escort you to safety through these Native Americans. So what do? They separate the men and women. The men are on one side, the women and children are on the other, except those that are younger than 7, as I previously mentioned. So you have men and women and children, all separated, different things. John Higbee is leading them, and you have these priesthood followers, the elders or priests of the Mormon Church, that are guiding these Baker Fancher Party men, and they're not next to each other; they're in different lines, and they're walking away safely. Right, the Baker Fancher Party thinks they're getting saved, and the Mormons know what's going to happen. So John Higbee on a horse going ahead, and they had previously agreed with the Indians that the Indians could kill the women and children. That way, they could take the blame. They were the ones that killed them. We didn't kill them. Like I said, it was thought out enough to make the Indians look like patsies. So they do that. They get to the designated location, but John Higbee doesn't give it. He's hoping that there's a last-minute change of heart and he doesn't have to kill all these men. So he goes a quarter mile past the agreed spot, and then this is the key word, halt. When John Higbee says halt, all the men are supposed to shoot at point-blank range with rifles the Baker Fancher Party men. And the Indians would then come running over and hatchet and scalp the women. And so John Higbee stops and he says the word, he says halt. Now in very different renditions I read, he either said halt or he said do your duty. Both of them were as different records have had. I'm not sure if it was do your duty or if it was halt. Either way, John Higbee was one that gave the order, and they all died. They all were killed within a matter of minutes. Now Nephi Johnson, he was a interpreter. He communicate with the Indians on behalf of the whites, and on the whites on behalf of the Indians. He knew the Native American language. He was standing on top of the hill, and he was instrumental in coordinating this with the Indians. He was doing what he was asked to do, and he coordinated this with all of them. But Nephi Johnson said this, I saw John D. Lee kill some of the women and children, for I was in position to see, and did see it all. He later testified, and when John D. Lee was on trial, and he was put to death. John D. Lee was. So after they kill everyone, there was looting. The Indians, the whites, grabbed all they could, and they left. So what was the aftermath like? After they left, there were still kids that were left over that were not killed. And what did they do? Like any good person does after you murders your parents, he adopts the kids. In some reports, John D. Lee had as much as 3 kids. Other reports said he only had 1. Regardless, John D. Lee was instrumental in coordinating this attack, and he literally took in the people he murdered, their children, and raised them for a year until things got taken care of and trials and everything was happened. But he did try to take them in and raise them, as did other people. There were several children left behind, and they all were adopted into the Mormon homes. So, as I mentioned earlier, there was a letter sent before this happened to Brigham Young. And Brigham Young, his name was James Haslam. It takes 3 days to get from Cedar City to Salt Lake back in those days, and it takes 3 days to get back. So he left on the 9th. Now, this all happened on the 11th, so he did not make it back in time. But when he did come back, the message from Brigham Young was, do not let the Indians do what they do, but do not lay a hand or finger on them. So Brigham Young said, do not hurt them, let them pass in peace. Now, why did this not go to trial immediately? Why was there not a public outrage and everything? Because within a year, the Civil War started, the American Civil War, and this was pushed until after that. So, why do you think they did it? Here we have, to kind of conclude and summarize everything, we have all these pressures that are coming on these Mormon people, or so-called pressures, that could give us a reason why. There was insecurity about the government. They're going to try to kill us. There's the past experiences. We're done having those type of experiences. We're not going to run away anymore. We're going to fight. Our leader is going to secede from the United States, so why shouldn't we fight now? All these, potential things that went in. But I believe that these men simply snapped. They wanted blood. They wanted to fight. They wanted to kill. They wanted to take their anger out on someone, something, somehow. Didn't matter. And so that's what they did. They saw a reason. They tried to have the Indians take the blame, but no one saw through that. I mean, everyone saw through that. That was not as effective as they hoped. And, there are bad people in every religion. There are terrible people in every religion. There are also good people in every religion. And this is an example of some of the worst things that have ever happened in any religion ever. There's no reason that anyone can say to justify the Mountain Meadows Massacre for any reason. It doesn't matter what's going on politically. It doesn't matter what's going on at home. It doesn't matter what you think is going on. It does not matter. You don't murder 120 people. You simply do not do that. John D. Lee was the only one who was tried, convicted, and killed. All three of those things. There were several people put on trial. There were several different things that happened, but all of them were eventually dropped. And John D. Lee was the ultimate scapegoat. I believe that there were several different men who should have been tried, such as John Higbee, Isaac Haight, George A. Smith, but I do not believe that Brigham Young was the reason that this happened. He was not a direct commander. He did not tell them to do this. Yes, he inspired the culture and the unease that was in there, but I don't feel, from what I've read and what I do not think that he sent the order to do this. I believe that those men acted on their own bloodlust, their own anger, their own whatever emotions they had. And as a result, 120 people were murdered. The Mountain Meadows Massacre is a huge tragedy. It's very serious. It's affected thousands and thousands of people for generations. And I don't think that it's something that should be brushed under in Utah history or in the Mormon church history or even in the immigrant history as everyone moves south. I believe it should be taught there as well, because it is something that is very, very important to know, so we do not make the same mistake again. Thank you for listening.